Her breath cut off as a stranger's arm locked around her throat, crushing her voice in a packed diner where no one dared move. He thought she was just another girl until a chair scraped behind him, and a calm voice said, "Take your hand off my daughter." The thug laughed, not realizing the man standing there owned everything he was about to lose. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. Alright, let's get back into it. Braun's tattooed forearm locked around Rachel Renard's throat, dragging her backward in the vinyl booth. Her breath vanished. Her hands clawed at his skin, nails digging into ink she couldn't see through the panic flooding her vision. The diner froze, forks suspended mid-air, conversations dying mid-sentence, everyone too afraid to move. "You don't know who you're messing with, sweetheart." Braun's voice carried the casual confidence of a man who'd done this before. He squeezed harder, his grip tightening like a vice around her windpipe. Rachel's vision blurred at the edges. A salt shaker toppled, rolling across the red formica table. Her legs kicked uselessly against the booth's underside, denim scraping against cracked vinyl. Outside the front window, Elliot Renard's conversation with his driver stopped mid-sentence. His dark eyes tracked movement through the glass, a struggle in the back booth, his daughter's face turning pale, a stranger's thick arm around her neck. His jaw tightened. His hand dropped from the phone. Braun had made his first mistake. He'd attacked someone without knowing whose blood ran through her veins. His second mistake would be not recognizing the man now walking back through the diner door. The late afternoon sun cut through the windows of Joe's roadside diner, casting long shadows across red vinyl booths and chipped formica tables. 20 minutes earlier, Elliot Renard had sat across from his daughter in the back corner booth, the same booth Rachel had specifically requested when she'd asked him to meet her here. Neutral ground, she'd called it, public, normal, away from his world. At 43, Elliot looked like exactly what he was, a man who commanded fear without raising his voice. Dark hair slicked back, sharp jawline shadowed with stubble, black suit jacket open at the collar, revealing the edge of tattoos that disappeared beneath expensive fabric. A gold chain glinted at his throat. His hands had rested on the table, calloused, controlled, decorated with rings that meant something to those who knew how to read them. He'd agreed to Rachel's terms that afternoon. No bodyguards hovering close enough to overhear. No visible security inside the restaurant. His men waited outside in the parking lot, watching the street from their positions near the black SUVs. Elliot had done something rare. He'd trusted his daughter's request for privacy. Now, as the glass door swung open and his polished dress shoes crossed the threshold back into Joe's diner, that trust transformed into something infinitely more dangerous. The restaurant had gone silent in his absence. That awful, pregnant silence where everyone knows something terrible is happening but no one dares intervene. Elliot's eyes found the scene immediately. Rachel, struggling in a stranger's chokehold, her face losing color. Her hands desperately clawing at a tattooed forearm that looked like it belonged to someone who broke bones for a living. Behind them, other diners sat frozen in their booths, a blonde woman with her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. A middle-aged man in the back, paralyzed. An older woman near the window, gripping her purse like it might protect her from what she was witnessing. None of them moved. None of them would. Elliot's expression didn't change as he walked deeper into the restaurant. His pace was measured, controlled the same deliberate stride he used when entering boardrooms or warehouses or back-alley negotiations. Each step purposeful, each movement calculated. Braun was too focused on Rachel to notice the approach. He leaned closer to her ear, his breath hot against her skin. "Should have been more careful who you pissed off, princess. Somebody wants you to remember your place." Rachel's fingers weakened against his forearm. Her chest heaved, desperate for air that wouldn't come. Black spots danced across her vision like static on a dying television. The floor creaked behind Braun. A shadow fell across the booth. Then a voice low, calm, and absolutely lethal cut through the silence. "Take your hand off my daughter." Braun's head snapped up. Elliot Renard stood 3 feet away, hands at his sides, jacket pushed back slightly at the hips. No weapon visible, no aggressive stance. Just presence, the kind of presence that made grown men reconsider their life choices. For a split second, Braun's grip loosened on Rachel's throat. Confusion flickered across his face. "Daughter?" He glanced down at the young woman choking in his arms, then back at the man in the expensive suit whose eyes had gone cold as winter steel. I said, Elliot repeated, taking one step closer. Take your hand off my daughter. The diner's collective breath caught. Braun's confusion hardened into defiance. He'd been given orders. He'd been sent to make a point. He didn't know who this guy in the monkey suit thought he was. But, you need to back up, old man, Braun snarled, tightening his grip on Rachel again. This doesn't concern you. Elliot's head tilted slightly, like he was considering something mildly interesting. You have 3 seconds. Or what? Or I break every bone in your arm before you hit the floor. Braun laughed a harsh, ugly sound. You don't know who you're F. Elliot moved. 1 second he was standing still, hands loose at his sides. The next, his right hand shot forward like a striking snake, fingers clamping around Braun's wrist with crushing force. The pressure point strike was surgical years of experience compressed into a single motion. Braun's grip on Rachel's throat released instantly, his hand spasming open. Rachel gasped, sucking in desperate lungfuls of air as she collapsed forward onto the table, coughing violently. Elliot didn't stop. He twisted Braun's arm with brutal efficiency, using leverage and anatomy against the bigger man. Braun's body followed the direction of the pain, rising halfway out of the booth, before Elliot slammed him sideways into the aisle. Braun stumbled, catching himself against the adjacent table. He swung wildly, his left fist cutting through air where Elliot's head had been a heartbeat earlier. Elliot stepped inside the punch, driving his knee into Braun's solar plexus. The air exploded from Braun's lungs. Before he could double over, Elliot's palm struck upward, catching him under the jaw with precisely calibrated force enough to scramble his senses, not enough to kill. Not here, not in front of Rachel. Braun's eyes rolled back, his knees buckled. He hit the floor face first, unconscious before his cheek met the worn linoleum. The entire exchange had taken less than 6 seconds. Elliot didn't even look at the body. He turned immediately to Rachel, kneeling beside the booth, his hand gentle on her shoulder. Rachel, look at me. She raised her head, tears streaming down her flushed face, one hand massaging her bruised throat. Her eyes found his terrified, confused, relieved all at once. I've got you, Elliot whispered, his voice shaking for the first time in years. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away tears. You're safe now. I've got you. Outside, car doors slammed. His men had heard the commotion. Inside, the diner remained frozen, every witness now understanding exactly who they'd just watched work. Elliot Renard helped his daughter out of the booth, wrapping his suit jacket around her trembling shoulders, his other arm steady around her waist. And as sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, growing closer with each passing second, one truth became absolutely clear to everyone in Joe's roadside diner. Braun had strangled the wrong girl, and he'd done it in front of the one man who would never let that go unpunished. 7 years earlier, Elliot Renard had stood in a hospital corridor, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and a doctor's words echoing in his ears like gunshots. We did everything we could. I'm sorry. His wife Isabel was gone. An aneurysm. No warning. No time to say goodbye. Just there one moment, laughing while making breakfast, and gone the next, collapsing on the kitchen floor while their 5-year-old daughter watched from the doorway, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Elliot had built an empire on control, on calculated risk, on reading situations 3 moves ahead. But he couldn't control a blood vessel rupturing in his wife's brain, couldn't anticipate the moment his entire world would fracture down the middle. He'd walked back into that hospital room where Isabel lay still, her hand already growing cold, and made a silent promise. Rachel would never know this pain again. He would protect her from everything, every threat, every danger, every possibility of loss. Even if it meant becoming the kind of man his wife had begged him not to be. The early years were harder than any negotiation Elliot had ever navigated. A 5-year-old didn't understand why Mommy wasn't coming home. She didn't understand why Daddy's phone rang at all hours, why men in dark suits appeared at their door, why they moved from their suburban house to a gated estate with cameras on every corner. Rachel cried herself to sleep for months. Elliot sat outside her bedroom door, listening, unable to comfort her the way Isabel would have. He didn't know the right words, didn't know how to explain death to someone who still believed in fairy tales, so he did what he knew how to do. He built walls. Physical ones first, security systems, vetted staff, drivers who doubled as bodyguards, then emotional ones. He became stricter, more structured. Bedtimes were non-negotiable. Schoolwork was supervised. Friends were carefully screened, their parents' backgrounds run through his network before Rachel could attend a single playdate. She grew up inside a fortress, safe but isolated. By the time Rachel turned 10, she'd started asking questions Elliot couldn't deflect. "Why do people look at you like that, Daddy?" They'd been at a restaurant, nothing fancy, just a family place near her school. But the owner had rushed over the moment Elliot entered, offering the best table, refusing payment, his hands shaking slightly as he poured water. Elliot had watched his daughter watch the interaction, her sharp eyes cataloging every detail. "Like what, sweetheart?" "Like they're scared of you." He'd considered lying, considered telling her people respected him, admired him, looked up to him. But Isabel's voice had whispered in his memory, "Never lie to our daughter." And Elliot had found himself caught between the man he'd been and the man he'd become. "Some people are scared," he'd admitted carefully, "because of the work I do." "What work?" "I make sure people follow the rules." "What happens if they don't?" Elliot had met her eyes, Isabel's eyes, dark and intelligent, and too perceptive for a 10-year-old, and realized his daughter was already piecing together truths he'd tried to hide. "Then there are consequences," he'd said quietly. Rachel had absorbed this with the seriousness she approached everything. Then she'd asked the question that still haunted him. "Is that why Mommy died? Because someone broke the rules?" "No, baby. No. Your mother died because sometimes bad things happen and there's nothing anyone can do to stop them." But even as he'd said it, Elliot had known the deeper truth. Isabel had died because he'd been too focused on building his empire to notice she'd been having headaches, had been tired, had needed to see a doctor weeks before that morning in the kitchen. He'd failed her. He would not fail Rachel. By 13, Rachel had stopped asking questions about his work. She'd started noticing other things instead, the way her classmates' parents avoided sitting near Elliot at school events, how invitations to birthday parties dried up once other families learned her last name, the whispers that followed her through hallways. She began pulling away. Not dramatically. Rachel was too much like him for teenage rebellion. But she stopped sharing details about her day, stopped introducing him to friends, stopped asking him to attend school functions. Elliot had tried to bridge the gap with gifts, a car on her 16th birthday, a college fund that could buy any future she wanted, anything material she might need. But Rachel didn't want things. She wanted the father she'd lost the same day her mother died. The breaking point had come 6 months ago, just after her 18th birthday. Rachel had been accepted to college across the country, deliberately chosen for its distance from Elliot's reach. When she'd told him, he'd immediately started making calls, arranging security, vetting apartments near campus. "No," Rachel had said simply. Elliot had looked up from his phone, confused. "No what?" "No guards. No security detail. No checking up on me. I'm going alone. That's not safe. I don't care. Rachel, you don't understand the kind of people who work for you." She'd stood from the dinner table, her voice trembling but firm. "I understand perfectly, Dad. I've understood since I was 10 years old. You run this city. People are terrified of you, and I don't want any part of it." The words had landed like physical blows. "Everything I've done," Elliot had said quietly, "has been to protect you." "You've been protecting yourself," Rachel had shot back, "from feeling what you felt when Mom died. You built this empire so you'd never feel powerless again." "But I'm not your empire, Dad. I'm your daughter, and I just want my father back." She'd left the room before Elliot could respond. He'd sat alone at that dinner table for an hour, staring at the empty chair across from him, hearing Isabel's voice again. "Don't let the work consume you. Don't let it take you from us." Too late, he'd thought. But 3 weeks ago, Rachel had called. Not angry, not distant. Just quiet. "Can we talk?" she'd asked. "Really talk? Somewhere normal. Just us." Elliot had agreed immediately, desperately. She'd chosen Joe's roadside diner. Public, neutral, away from his world. And Elliot had made the decision to trust her, to give her what she'd asked for: privacy, normalcy, a conversation without his shadow looming over it. He'd left his men outside. He'd sat across from her in that red vinyl booth, and he'd listened as Rachel told him she loved him, but couldn't love what he'd become. Then his phone had buzzed. He'd stepped outside. And in those 3 minutes of absence, his empire's rot had reached out and touched the one thing he'd sworn to keep pure. Now, standing in that same diner with Rachel trembling in his arms and Braun unconscious on the floor, Elliot understood with crushing clarity. His protection had failed. His world had finally caught his daughter, and there would be consequences. 3 hours before Braun's arm closed around Rachel's throat, Elliot Renard had been standing in his study, staring at his daughter's text message. "Can we meet today? Just us. I want to talk. Really talk." The message had arrived at 11:47 a.m. Elliot had read it 17 times, analyzing every word choice, every implication. In his world, "we need to talk" usually preceded betrayal, demands, or ultimatums, but this was Rachel. And she'd said, "Just us." He'd typed and deleted 4 different responses before settling on, "Name the place." Her reply came instantly, "Joe's Roadside Diner, Route 9, 3 p.m. And Dad, please come alone. No security inside. I need this to feel normal." Elliot had stared at that word normal like it was written in a foreign language. Normal wasn't something that existed in his life. Hadn't existed since Isabel died, and he'd made choices that turned protection into domination, safety into control. But Rachel was asking. So at 2:47 p.m., Elliot had pulled up to Joe's Diner in his black Mercedes, leaving his usual convoy of SUVs a block away. His driver, Thomas, had protested quietly. His head of security had been more vocal. "Sir, we can't protect you if we're not." "Then don't protect me," Elliot had said simply. "Stay outside, watch the perimeter. But my daughter wants normal, and for one afternoon, I'm going to give her that." He'd walked into the diner alone, scanning the room with instincts he couldn't turn off: exits, sightlines, potential threats. The place was half empty, a few truckers at the counter, a family in one booth, an elderly couple by the window. Rachel had already claimed the back corner booth, the one farthest from the entrance. She'd looked up when the bell above the door chimed, and for a moment, Elliot had seen the little girl who used to run to him when he came home, who'd trusted him completely before the world taught her not to. "Hi, Dad." Her voice had been soft, cautious. "Hi, sweetheart." He'd slid into the booth across from her, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked: black suit, gold chain, tattoos creeping up his neck. Rachel wore a denim jacket over a simple shirt, her dark hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked young, vulnerable, beautiful in the way her mother had been beautiful. A waitress had appeared almost immediately. "Coffee? Please," Rachel had said. Elliot had nodded. Black. The waitress had poured, disappeared, left them in the uncomfortable silence that had become their default over the past year. Rachel had been the one to break it. "Thank you for coming," she'd said, wrapping her hands around the ceramic mug. "And for respecting what I asked. About the security." "You asked for normal," Elliot had replied. "I'm trying." Something had shifted in Rachel's expression. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. She'd taken a sip of coffee, gathering courage for whatever came next. "I've been thinking a lot," she'd started carefully. "About us. About everything that's happened since Mom died. About the distance between us." Elliot had felt his chest tighten but kept his face neutral. "I've thought about it too." "I know you have." Rachel had met his eyes directly, the way she always did when something mattered. "I know you think you failed me, that you weren't there enough, weren't the right kind of father, but Dad, you didn't fail me by being absent. You failed me by being too present in all the wrong ways." The words had stung precisely because they were true. "I built walls to keep you safe," Elliot had said quietly. "You built walls to keep yourself from feeling," Rachel had countered, not unkindly. "After Mom died, you turned into someone else. Someone harder, someone scarier. And I get it, I do. You were terrified of losing me too. But Dad, you can't protect me from life. You can't control everything." Elliot's jaw had worked silently. Outside the window, Thomas leaned against the Mercedes, watching the street. Normal people walked by, living normal lives, unburdened by the weight Elliot carried every day. "I love you," Rachel had said suddenly, her voice breaking slightly. "I need you to know that. Whatever else happens, whatever I'm about to say, I love you. You're my father, and you always will be." Elliot's throat had constricted. "I love you too, Rachel. More than, I know." She'd reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "That's why this is so hard. Because I know everything you've done. You've done because you love me. But I can't love this, Dad. I can't love what you've become. The empire, the fear, the way people look at me like we're dangerous. They look at you that way because of me," Elliot had said, anger creeping into his voice. "Not because of anything you've done. And I can fix that. You can't fix it by being more of what you are," Rachel had interrupted gently. "You can only fix it by being less, by stepping back, by choosing me over the power." The waitress had returned with menus they hadn't asked for, sensing the tension and retreating quickly. Elliot had stared at his daughter, this brave, beautiful young woman who was asking him to dismantle everything he'd built. "If I step back," he'd said carefully, "there are people who will see that as weakness. People who will move against me. Against us." "Then maybe the Empire isn't worth having," Rachel had said simply. "It's not that simple." "It is, though." She'd squeezed his hand. "Dad, I don't want your protection if it costs you your soul. I don't want security that comes from fear. I want you. Just you. The man Mom fell in love with. The father who used to read me bedtime stories and make terrible pancakes on Sunday mornings." Elliot had felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he'd spent 7 years building, starting to crumble. "I'm trying," he'd whispered. "God, Rachel, I'm trying. But I don't know how to be that man anymore." "Yes, you do," she'd said. "You're being him right now. Sitting here, listening to me, being vulnerable." They'd sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years between them starting to lift. Then, Rachel's expression had shifted, something darker crossing her features. "There's something else I need to tell you," she'd said. "Something that's been happening at school." Elliot had straightened immediately, instincts flaring. "What kind of something?" "Men have been watching me," Rachel had admitted. "Not obviously, but I've noticed the same faces. Different cars parked near campus. Someone asked my roommate questions about my schedule last week." Ice had flooded Elliot's veins. "Why didn't you tell me immediately?" "Because I knew you'd react like this," Rachel had said. "I knew you'd lock me down, put guards on me, turn my life into a prison again. But Dad, I'm telling you now because I trust you to handle it differently, to not overreact." Elliot's phone had buzzed in his pocket. He'd pulled it out, seen Thomas's name on the screen. "I need to take this," he'd said. "I'm sorry, just 1 second." He'd slid out of the booth, walked toward the front door. Thomas had sounded concerned about a car that had circled the block twice, and Elliot had stepped outside to assess. That's when everything had changed. Those 3 minutes outside discussing security protocols, scanning the street, making sure the perimeter was secure were the 3 minutes that shattered his promise to Rachel. The 3 minutes when his world had reached through the diner window and touched his daughter. When he'd turned back and seen Braun's arm around Rachel's throat, Elliot had understood with devastating clarity. Normal was never an option. Not for men like him. Not for daughters of men like him. And the empire he'd built to protect her had just proven to be her greatest danger. 48 hours before Braun walked into Joe's roadside diner, a photograph had been uploaded to an encrypted server that only Elliot Renard's inner circle could access. The photo showed Rachel Renard leaving her university campus, backpack slung over one shoulder, denim jacket catching afternoon sunlight. She was smiling at something on her phone, completely unaware she'd been photographed. Beneath the image, a single line of text. "Protected property. Eyes only. Do not approach." The message was meant as a warning to Elliot's organization, a reminder that Rachel was untouchable, off-limits, sacred ground, that no one in the Empire was to go near under any circumstances. But information, like water, flows downward, and sometimes it gets contaminated along the way. Braun Casey wasn't important enough to have access to Elliot Renard's encrypted servers. At 28, he was exactly what he looked like, muscle for hire, a mid-level enforcer who collected debts, intimidated witnesses, and did the kind of work that required more brawn than brains. He worked for Derek Hammond, who worked for someone who worked for someone who eventually answered to Elliot Renard. The chain of command was long enough that Braun had never actually met the man at the top, had never needed to. In Braun's world, Elliot Renard was more myth than man, a name whispered in back rooms, a reputation that kept people in line. But Braun had never seen him, never dealt with him directly, never had reason to fear him personally. That was his first mistake. His second was trusting Derek Hammond's judgment. 2 days ago, Braun had been sitting in a dive bar on the south side, nursing his third beer and watching a basketball game he had money on, when Derek had slid into the booth across from him. "Got a job for you," Derek had said without preamble. He'd been nervous. Braun had noticed fingers drumming on the table, eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. "What kind of job?" Derek had pulled out his phone, swiped to a photo, and turned the screen toward Braun. The image showed a young woman, early 20s, dark hair, pretty in an understated way. College girl, from the look of the background. "This girl's been causing problems," Derek had said, running her mouth, making threats. "Boss wants her scared. Not hurt, just scared enough to remember her place." Braun had studied the photo, memorizing features. "What'd she do?" "Does it matter?" Derek had snapped, his nervousness bleeding into irritation. "You want the job or not? $5,000 for 10 minutes of work. Follow her. Corner her somewhere public enough that she can't scream, but private enough that you won't get arrested. Put your hands on her. Make it clear what happens if she doesn't shut up. $5,000 for intimidating a college girl. Easy money. The kind of job Braun had done a dozen times before. Who is she? Braun had asked, because he always asked. Knowing context kept you alive in this business. Nobody important, Derek had said, too quickly. Just some girl who thinks she can threaten the wrong people? You in or out? Braun had taken the job. What he didn't know, what Derek Hammond himself didn't fully understand, was that the photograph had been lifted from the protected server by Derek's cousin, a low-level IT contractor who'd been trying to impress Derek with his access to insider information. The cousin had seen Rachel's photo, seen the words protected property, and misunderstood completely. In his limited understanding of how the organization worked, he'd assumed protected property meant Rachel was someone's girl, a mistress, maybe, or an informant who needed to be kept in line. He'd sent the photo to Derek with a fabricated story about Rachel threatening to go to the police, thinking he was helping solve a problem. Derek, ambitious and stupid in equal measure, had seen an opportunity to prove himself. If he could quietly handle a potential threat before it reached higher management, maybe he'd get noticed, maybe he'd move up the chain. So he'd given Braun the job. And Braun, who trusted Derek's judgment about as much as any enforcer trusts any middle manager, had pocketed the cash advance and started following Rachel Renard. For 2 days, Braun had tracked her movements, campus to coffee shop to library to an off-campus apartment she shared with roommates. Nothing interesting, nothing unusual, just a normal college girl living a normal life. It had seemed almost too easy. This morning, Braun had followed Rachel's car as it headed east on Route 9. When she'd pulled into Joe's roadside diner, Braun had parked 3 spaces down and watched through the window as she'd settled into a back corner booth. Alone. Unprotected. Perfect. He'd waited 15 minutes, watching her order coffee, check her phone, glance toward the door like she was waiting for someone. When a man in an expensive black suit had walked in and slid into the booth across from her, Braun had assumed it was a boyfriend. Rich kid, probably. Someone who'd make the scare tactics even more effective. The man had stayed maybe 20 minutes before stepping outside to take a phone call. Rachel had been left alone in the booth, scrolling through her phone. Braun had seen his window. He'd entered the diner, ordered a coffee at the counter to avoid suspicion, and casually made his way toward the back. The place was quiet, just a handful of customers who looked like they'd scatter at the first sign of trouble. Rachel hadn't noticed him approaching from behind, hadn't seen him slide into the booth directly behind hers, close enough that he could hear her breathing. Braun had counted to 10, letting his presence settle. Then he'd moved. His arm had shot forward, wrapping around her throat from behind, dragging her against the booth's backrest. She'd gasped a sharp, desperate sound, and her hands had immediately flown to his forearm, nails digging into tattooed skin. "You don't know who you're messing with, sweetheart," Braun had growled, squeezing harder. The words were part of the script Derek had suggested. Make it personal. Make it threatening. Make it stick. Rachel's body had gone rigid with panic. Braun had felt her pulse hammering against his forearm, had felt her strength fading as oxygen became scarce. The diner had gone silent around them. Good. Fear spread fast in places like this. Should have been more careful who you pissed off, princess, Braun had continued, leaning close to her ear. Somebody wants you to remember your place. He'd been so focused on delivering the message, on making sure Rachel understood the threat, that he hadn't heard the front door open behind him, hadn't noticed the man in the black suit re-entering the diner, hadn't seen the expression on Elliot Renard's face when he'd recognized his daughter being strangled. The voice that came from behind, low, calm, absolutely lethal, had made every muscle in Braun's body go rigid. Take your hand off my daughter. In that moment, 3 realizations had crashed through Braun's mind simultaneously. First, the girl he was strangling wasn't nobody important. Second, the man in the expensive suit wasn't her boyfriend. Third, Derek Hammond had just gotten him killed. Braun had loosened his grip slightly, confusion flooding his system as he turned his head and met Elliot Renard's eyes for the first time. Dark, cold, completely empty of mercy, I said. Elliot had repeated, each word precise as a blade. Take your hand off my daughter. And Braun had understood, with absolute clarity, that he'd just made the worst mistake of his life. He'd strangled the mafia boss's daughter, and the mafia boss had been right there the entire time. The moment Elliot stepped outside Joe's diner to take Thomas's call, the air itself seemed to shift. Inside, Rachel had watched her father disappear through the glass door, relieved to have a moment to collect herself. The conversation had been harder than she'd expected, admitting her fear about being followed, asking him not to overreact, trying to balance honesty with the knowledge that any threat to her safety would trigger every protective instinct Elliot possessed. She'd pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages from her roommate, without really reading them, trying to slow her racing heart. She hadn't noticed the man at the counter turn slightly on his stool, studying her reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser. Braun had recognized her immediately. Same face as the photo Derek had shown him, same denim jacket, same dark hair pulled back from her face. She was alone now, vulnerable, and the handful of other customers in the diner looked like the type who'd pretend not to notice trouble even if it unfolded right in front of them. Perfect conditions. He'd drained the last of his coffee, left a $5 bill on the counter, and stood casually just another customer finishing his break. Nothing suspicious, nothing memorable. Outside, Elliot had his back to the diner window, phone pressed to his ear. Thomas was explaining something about a suspicious vehicle that had circled the block, asking permission to investigate. Elliot's attention was divided between the call and scanning the street, his instincts telling him something felt wrong even if he couldn't identify what. "Keep eyes on it," Elliot had instructed. "If it comes around again, get the plates and run them." Inside the diner, Braun moved toward the back corner. Rachel's table was positioned against the wall, red vinyl booth stretching along the window side. The booth directly behind hers sat empty, separated only by a low barrier that came up to shoulder height when seated. Braun slid into that empty booth, smooth as silk, his back now pressed against the same padded barrier that supported Rachel's back on the other side. She hadn't noticed. She was typing a response to her roommate, something about picking up groceries on the way home. Braun counted his own heartbeat. 1, 2, 3. He could hear her breathing on the other side of the partition. Could hear the soft tap of her fingers on her phone screen. 4, 5, 6. The elderly couple near the window stood to leave, the husband helping his wife with her coat. The waitress disappeared into the kitchen. A trucker at the counter was absorbed in a newspaper, coffee going cold beside him. 7, 8, 9. Outside, Elliot had ended the call with Thomas and was turning back toward the diner, his conversation with Rachel unfinished, the weight of what she'd told him about being followed settling heavy in his chest. 10. Braun moved. He twisted in the booth, rising slightly, his arm shooting over the low partition like a snake striking. His forearm found Rachel's throat before she could draw breath to scream. Her phone clattered to the table. Braun's muscles flexed, dragging her backward against the booth. Her body went rigid with shock, then panic. Her hands flew to his forearm nails, digging into tattooed skin, fingers desperately trying to pry him loose. "You don't know who you're messing with, sweetheart," Braun growled, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Rachel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The pressure on her windpipe was absolute, professional. Braun had done this before, knew exactly how much force to apply to terrify without killing. Around them, the diner froze. The trucker's newspaper lowered slowly, his eyes widening. A blonde woman 3 booths away gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The waitress emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 plates, saw what was happening, and stopped dead in her tracks. No one moved to help. This was the calculus of violence in public spaces, everyone hoping someone else would intervene, everyone terrified of becoming the next target. Braun squeezed harder, feeling Rachel's pulse hammering against his forearm like a trapped bird. "Should have been more careful who you pissed off, princess," he continued, leaning closer to her ear. Her hair smelled like vanilla shampoo, an incongruously innocent detail that almost made him hesitate. Almost. "Somebody wants you to remember your place." Rachel's vision began to blur at the edges. Black spots danced across her field of view. Her lungs burned, screaming for air that wouldn't come. Her fingers weakened against Braun's arm, her strength fading with each second that passed without oxygen. The world was narrowing to a tunnel sound becoming distant, light fading, her father's face from their conversation just minutes ago floating in her dying consciousness. "I love you, Dad." Had she said that out loud? Had she gotten to tell him? Outside, Elliot's hand touched the diner's door handle. Through the glass, he could see the interior booths, tables, the counter. His eyes tracked movement toward the back. Someone struggling, a booth in shadow, an arm locked around. Recognition hit Elliot like a physical blow. Rachel, his daughter, being strangled. The door swung open. The bell chimed a cheerful, obscene sound given what was unfolding inside. Elliot's training took over before conscious thought could interfere. His eyes catalogued the scene in microseconds, Rachel's face turning pale, her hands weakening against her attacker's forearm, a large man behind her in the adjacent booth, the frozen witnesses, the exits, the threats. His body moved forward with the controlled precision of a predator that had just identified prey. No running, no shouting, just purposeful, measured steps that ate the distance between the door and the back corner booth. Braun was too focused on Rachel to notice the approach immediately. He was watching her face, gauging how close to unconsciousness she was, timing the moment when he'd release her scared but alive. The message delivered. Then a shadow fell across the table. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. Braun's head snapped up, his grip loosening slightly on Rachel's throat as confusion flooded his system. The man in the black suit stood 3 feet away. Not the boyfriend Braun had assumed. Something else entirely. Something that made the primitive part of Braun's brain start screaming warnings. Elliot Renard's face was a mask of controlled fury. His dark eyes had gone completely flat, the look of a man who'd killed before and would kill again without hesitation or remorse. When he spoke, his voice cut through the diner's silence like a blade through silk. "Take your hand off my daughter." The words hung in the air, each syllable weighted with threat. Braun's mind stuttered. "Daughter?" He glanced down at Rachel, then back at the man whose presence suddenly filled the entire space. Understanding crashed through him with the force of a freight train. This wasn't some rich boyfriend. This was Elliot Renard, the Elliot Renard. And Braun had just strangled his daughter. I didn't," Braun started, his voice cracking. "You have 3 seconds," Elliot interrupted, his tone conversational in a way that was somehow more terrifying than shouting would have been. Braun's training, such as it was, screamed at him to release the girl, to back away, to apologize and hope for mercy. But his pride, his ego, the same stupid machismo that had gotten him into and out of dozens of fights, made him tighten his grip instead. "You need to back up, old man." Braun snarled, trying to inject authority into his voice even as his survival instincts screamed that he was making a catastrophic mistake. "This doesn't concern you." The lie was reflexive, defensive. Even as the words left his mouth, Braun knew they were meaningless. Elliot's head tilted slightly, like he was observing something mildly interesting. A predator deciding how to kill its prey. "Or what?" Braun demanded, his voice rising, desperation bleeding through the bravado. Elliot's answer was quiet, precise, absolute. "Or I break every bone in your arm before you hit the floor." Braun laughed, a harsh, ugly sound born of fear disguised as confidence. "You don't know who you're fa." He never finished the sentence. Elliot moved. Braun regained consciousness to the smell of old coffee and the metallic taste of blood in his mouth. His jaw felt like it had been hit with a sledgehammer. His ribs screamed with each shallow breath. When he tried to move his right arm, white-hot pain shot through his shoulder, and he realized with distant horror that Elliot Renard hadn't been making an idle threat. Something in his arm was definitely broken. He was still on the floor of Joe's diner, but the scene had changed. The other customers had cleared out, whether voluntarily or otherwise. Braun couldn't tell. The waitress stood behind the counter, pale and shaking, her hands gripping the edge like it was the only thing keeping her upright. 2 men Braun had never seen before stood near the entrance, dressed in dark suits that screamed professional security. They weren't looking at him. They were looking at Elliot Renard, waiting for instructions. And Elliot himself sat in the booth where Rachel had been, his daughter now beside him instead of across from him. His arm was around her shoulders, holding her close, while his other hand held a glass of water to her lips. "Small sips," Elliot was saying, his voice gentle in a way that made Braun's stomach twist. "That's it, sweetheart. Just breathe." Rachel's hands trembled as she held the glass, her throat visibly bruised where Braun's arm had been. She was crying quietly, tears streaming down her flushed cheeks, but she was breathing, alive. Braun tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain exploded through his torso, forcing a groan from his lips. The sound drew Elliot's attention. Those dark eyes shifted from his daughter to Braun, and the transformation was instantaneous. The gentle father disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating and utterly merciless. "Get him up," Elliot said quietly to the 2 men by the door. They moved immediately, crossing the diner in synchronized steps. Strong hands gripped Braun under his armpits, hauling him to his feet despite his broken arm and cracked ribs. He bit back a scream, stars exploding across his vision. They dragged him to a chair at the counter, forcing him down onto the cracked vinyl stool. One of the men produced a zip tie from inside his jacket, securing Braun's good hand to the stool's metal frame. Elliot stood slowly from the booth, his movements deliberate. He pressed a kiss to the top of Rachel's head, murmured something Braun couldn't hear, then walked toward the counter with the measured pace of an executioner approaching the scaffold. He stopped 3 feet from Braun, hands in his pockets, his expensive suit somehow still immaculate despite the violence that had just unfolded. "What's your name?" Elliot asked conversationally. Braun's mouth was dry, his tongue felt thick. Braun Casey. Braun. Elliot repeated it like he was tasting the syllables, filing them away. "Who sent you?" The question landed with the weight of inevitability. Braun had known it was coming, had been rehearsing answers from the moment Elliot's fist had connected with his jaw. "I don't." "Let me save us both some time," Elliot interrupted, his tone still conversational, but edged with something that made Braun's skin crawl. "You're going to tell me who sent you. You can tell me now, quickly and completely. Or you can tell me in 20 minutes after my associate here." He gestured to one of the suited men. "Breaks your other arm. Either way, I'm getting the information. The only variable is how much you suffer first." Braun's survival instincts warred with his sense of self-preservation. Ratting out Derek Hammond meant becoming a target, but looking into Elliot Renard's eyes, Braun realized he was already a target, and his life expectancy could now be measured in hours rather than years. "Derek Hammond," Braun gasped, the name spilling out before he could stop it. "Derek Hammond gave me the job. Showed me a photo, said the girl was causing problems. Needed to be scared. I swear to God, I didn't know she was your daughter." Derek Hammond. Elliot's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, recognition perhaps, or calculation. "Who does Derek work for?" "I don't know the whole chain," Braun said quickly. "He's middle management. Reports to someone who reports to someone. He gave me $5,000 to scare her. That's all I know." Elliot was silent for a long moment, processing. Behind him, Rachel watched from the booth, her eyes red from crying but focused, taking in every detail of this world she'd tried so hard to escape. "Show me the photo," Elliot said finally. "My phone," Braun managed. "Front pocket." One of the suited men retrieved it, unlocking it at Elliot's instruction. Braun's face recognition still worked despite the swelling and pulling up the photo Derek had sent. Elliot stared at the image of his daughter leaving campus, his jaw working silently. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "This photo came from my organization," he said. "Not a question, but a statement. From inside my own network." "I don't know where Derek got it," Braun said desperately. "I swear, he just said she was a problem that needed handling. I had no idea." "What did he tell you she did?" Elliot's eyes snapped back to Braun. "What problem was she supposedly causing?" "He said she was threatening to go to the police, making noise about something. I didn't ask for details. You just took money to strangle a young woman in a public restaurant." Elliot finished, his voice flat. "Without asking questions, without verifying the story, without considering that maybe, just maybe, you were being lied to." Braun had no answer for that. The truth was damning enough without embellishment. Elliot turned to one of his men. "Call Marcus. Tell him I need Derek Hammond's location within the hour. And I want a full audit of everyone who had access to protected files in the last 72 hours. "Yes, sir." Elliot turned back to Braun, and for the first time, something like pity crossed his features. "You understand what happens now?" Braun's throat constricted. "Please. I didn't know. I swear I didn't." "I believe you," Elliot said, and somehow that was worse than anger would have been. "You're a blunt instrument. Someone pointed you in a direction and you went. But Braun..." He leaned closer. Close enough that Braun could smell his cologne. "You put your hands on my daughter. You strangled her in front of witnesses. You terrified her. And whether you knew who she was or not doesn't change what you did." "I'm sorry," Braun whispered, the words pathetic even to his own ears. "God, I'm so sorry." "Tell that to her," Elliot said, gesturing toward Rachel. "Look at her. Look at what you did, and tell her you're sorry." Braun forced himself to turn his head, to meet Rachel's eyes across the diner. She looked so young, so vulnerable, the bruises on her throat already darkening to purple. She held her father's jacket around her shoulders like armor, and when their eyes met, Braun saw no forgiveness there. Only fear. and disgust. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Rachel said nothing. She just turned her face against her father's shoulder, unable or unwilling to look at him anymore. Elliot straightened, nodding to his men. "Take him. Put him somewhere quiet until we sort out the chain of command. I want him alive for now. He's evidence." The zip tie was cut. Hands gripped Braun's arms, the broken one making him howl, and dragged him toward the exit. As they reached the door, Braun risked one last look back. Elliot Renard had returned to the booth, sitting beside his daughter, his arm around her shoulders, whispering things Braun couldn't hear. The diner had become their private space, a father and daughter in the aftermath of violence. And Braun understood with absolute clarity that he'd just witnessed the most dangerous thing in the world. Not Elliot Renard's capacity for violence, but his capacity for love, and what happened when someone threatened it. The door closed behind him, the bell chiming cheerfully, and Braun Casey disappeared into the back of a black SUV, knowing he'd never be the same man again, if he was allowed to remain a man at all. The safe house was 15 miles outside the city, a nondescript 2-story building that could have been anyone's suburban home. Elliot had purchased it 6 years ago, under a shell corporation, one of a dozen properties scattered across the state that existed for moments exactly like this. Rachel sat on the leather couch in the main room, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite the warmth of the afternoon. She hadn't spoken much during the drive from Joe's diner, just stared out the window while Elliot's driver navigated surface streets with practiced efficiency. Elliot stood by the window now, phone pressed to his ear, his third call in the past 20 minutes. His jacket hung on a chair, his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing the full extent of the tattoos that marked his arms, remnants of a younger, hungrier version of himself. "I don't care if you have to wake him up," Elliot said into the phone, his voice carrying the edge of barely controlled fury. "I want Marcus Trent in my office in 1 hour. No excuses." He ended the call, immediately dialing another number. Rachel watched him, recognizing the transformation she'd witnessed countless times throughout her childhood. This was Elliot Renard, the crime boss, efficient, ruthless, completely focused on eliminating threats. The gentle father who'd held her in the diner had receded, replaced by the man who'd built an empire on fear and control. "Dad," she said quietly. Elliot held up one finger weight as the call connected. "Thomas, I need you to pull surveillance footage from every camera within 3 blocks of the diner. I want to know who Derek Hammond has been meeting with, who he's been calling, everywhere he's been in the past week." He listened for a moment, then, "I don't care if it takes all night. This came from inside our organization. Someone in my house put my daughter's photo in the hands of a thug who nearly killed her. I want names, Thomas. All of them." Another pause. Elliot's jaw tightened. No police. This stays internal. We handle our own problems." He hung up, immediately starting another call. "Dad," Rachel tried again, louder this time. Elliot turned, his expression softening slightly when he met her eyes. "Just one more call, sweetheart, I promise." But Rachel stood, letting the blanket fall to the couch. "Stop." The single word, delivered with quiet force, made Elliot pause mid-dial. "Stop making calls," Rachel continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Stop planning. Stop whatever it is you're about to do. Just stop and talk to me." Elliot lowered the phone slowly, confusion flickering across his features. "Rachel, I know what you need to do," she interrupted. "You need to find Derek Hammond. You need to trace how my photo got leaked. You need to eliminate the threat and make an example so this never happens again. I know, Dad. I've watched you do this my entire life. Then you understand. I understand that you're about to become exactly what I asked you not to be," Rachel said, her eyes filling with tears. 3 hours ago, we sat in that diner, and I asked you to choose me over the Empire. I asked you to step back, to be different, and now, the first time something goes wrong, you're right back to this." Elliot set his phone down on the table with deliberate care. "Rachel, someone tried to kill you. Someone tried to scare me," Rachel corrected, "and they failed. I'm alive. I'm okay. Bruised, terrified, but okay, because you were there. And if I hadn't been?" Elliot's voice rose slightly, emotion cracking through his control. "If I'd stayed outside 30 seconds longer? If I hadn't seen what was happening? You would be dead, Rachel. My daughter would be dead because someone in my organization made a mistake. So fix the mistake," Rachel said, "but don't let it consume you. Don't let it turn you into, she gestured at the phones, the security monitors on the wall, the locked cabinet that probably contained weapons, into this. Elliot stared at her, the weight of her words settling over him like a physical burden. He moved to the couch, sitting heavily, his head dropping into his hands. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. When Elliot finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed. I don't know how to protect you without being this, he admitted, his voice raw. Every instinct I have is screaming at me to burn down everything and everyone who had any part in what happened today. To make sure the entire city knows what happens when someone touches my daughter. Rachel sat beside him, taking his hand. I know, but Dad, that's exactly what I'm afraid of. Not the people who might hurt me. I'm afraid of losing you to this. To the violence and the revenge and the empire that takes and takes, until there's nothing left of the man my mother loved. Your mother, Elliot's voice broke. Isabel would have known what to do. She was better at this than me. Better at being human. She loved you, Rachel said softly. The real you. Not the empire. Not the power. Just you. And I love you too, Dad. But I need you to trust that there's a way through this that doesn't end with more bodies and more fear. Elliot was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of Rachel's hand, the same unconscious gesture he'd done when she was little and couldn't sleep. I have to find Derek Hammond, he said finally. And I have to find out how your photo got leaked. That's not negotiable, Rachel. This threat came from inside my organization, which means there's rot in the foundation. If I don't cut it out, it will spread. Okay, Rachel said. Then cut it out. But Dad, she squeezed his hand, don't burn down the whole house to kill the termites. A ghost of a smile crossed Elliot's face. That's a very specific metaphor. Mom used to say it, Rachel admitted. When you'd come home angry about business, she'd tell you that sometimes the measured response was harder than the nuclear option, but it was the one that let you sleep at night. Elliot closed his eyes, and Rachel saw tears escape from beneath his lashes. I miss her, he whispered. God, I miss her every single day. Me too. Rachel leaned her head against his shoulder. But she's not here, Dad, so we have to be better for each other. We have to be enough. They sat in silence for a while, father and daughter, survivors of violence and loss. Finally, Elliot's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Marcus Trent had arrived at the office. I need to go, Elliot said quietly. I need to get answers. I know. Rachel straightened, wiping her eyes. But promise me something. Anything. Promise me that when you find Derek Hammond, when you find whoever leaked my photo, you'll remember that I'm watching, that every choice you make now, I'm going to live with. That the kind of father you are in the next 24 hours is the kind of father I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. Elliot cupped her face in his hands, studying her like he was memorizing every detail. I promise, he said. I promise I'll try to be the man you deserve, the man your mother believed I could be. He kissed her forehead, held her close for a moment, then stood and reached for his jacket. Thomas will stay with you, Elliot said, sliding his arms into the sleeves. Full security. No one gets within 100 yards of this house without clearance. Dad, non-negotiable, Elliot said firmly. You asked me to be measured. This is me being measured. I'm not locking you in a fortress, but I'm also not leaving you unprotected. Meet me halfway. Rachel nodded slowly. Okay, halfway. Elliot headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. He looked back at his daughter, bruised, beautiful, brave, and felt something shift inside his chest. I'm going to fix this, he said. Not with bodies, not with fear. I'm going to fix the rot in my organization, and then I'm going to do what I should have done years ago. What's that? Walk away from it, Elliot said simply. All of it. Because you're right, Rachel. The Empire isn't worth having if it costs me you. He left before she could respond, the door closing softly behind him. And as Elliot Renard drove back toward the city, toward Marcus Trent and the interrogations and the investigations that would expose the cancer in his organization, he carried his daughter's words like a talisman. Don't burn down the whole house to kill the termites. It was time to be surgical. Time to cut out the rot and save what remained. Even if it meant dismantling everything he'd built. Marcus Trent sat across from Elliot in the downtown office. A folder of surveillance photos spread across the mahogany desk between them. His expression was grim, the kind of look that preceded bad news delivered by loyal men. Derek Hammond is an idiot, Marcus said without preamble. But he's not the source. Elliot's fingers drummed against the armrest of his leather chair, the only outward sign of the fury coiling in his gut. Explain. Marcus pulled a photo from the stack, a screen capture from Derek's phone records. Derek received Rachel's photo from his cousin, Tyler Hammond. Tyler works IT for our data management contractor. He accessed the protected server 4 days ago, saw Rachel's file marked protected property, and completely misunderstood what that meant, so Tyler gave the photo to Derek, who fabricated a story about Rachel being a threat to justify sending Braun after her. Marcus finished. Derek's been trying to climb the ladder, thought handling a problem quietly would impress management. He's ambitious and stupid, dangerous combination. Elliot was silent for a moment, processing. Where are they now? Derek's in holding room 3 downstairs. Tyler's already been picked up, he's in room 5. Both are terrified, both are talking. Marcus hesitated. Elliot, they genuinely didn't know Rachel was your daughter. The file designation was vague and incompetence doesn't excuse nearly getting my daughter killed, Elliot said, his voice sharp as broken glass. What about the photo itself? Who took it? Who uploaded it to the server? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. That was authorized. Your security team has been quietly monitoring Rachel since she started college, perimeter surveillance only, no direct contact. The photo was taken as part of routine protective documentation. It was supposed to stay classified. Elliot's jaw tightened. He'd ordered that surveillance himself, though he'd never told Rachel. Another secret, another control measure designed to keep her safe that had instead put her in danger. So my own security protocols created the vulnerability, Elliot said quietly. In a way, yes. Elliot stood, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Lights twinkled in the darkness below, thousands of lives being lived, unaware that the man who controlled much of their world was contemplating tearing it all down. What's the recommended action? Elliot asked, though he already knew the answer. Standard protocol, Marcus said carefully. Derek and Tyler disappear. The IT contractor loses their contract. We tighten server access, implement biometric verification, audit everyone who's touched sensitive files in the past year. Message gets sent internally, mistakes have consequences. Elliot had heard variations of this speech dozens of times. It was how organizations like his maintained discipline, how they prevented future mistakes. Clean, efficient, permanent. It was also exactly what Rachel had asked him not to become. No, Elliot said softly. Marcus blinked. Sir? I said no. Elliot turned from the window, his decision crystallizing even as he spoke. We're not disappearing anyone. We're not sending messages through violence. We're doing this differently. Elliot, with respect, if we don't respond decisively, it shows weakness. People will think. Let them think, Elliot interrupted. Marcus, my daughter was strangled today because the system I built to protect her became the weapon used against her. That's not Derek's failure or Tyler's incompetence, that's mine. Marcus stood slowly, concern etched across his features. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm done. Elliot moved back to his desk, sinking into the chair with the weight of the decision settling over him. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. I'm going to dismantle this, Marcus, piece by piece. And I'm going to do it the right way. You can't just walk away from, watch me, Elliot said, meeting his old friend's eyes. I've spent 7 years building an empire to protect one person, and today that empire nearly killed her. I won't let that happen again. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. What do you want me to do about Derek and Tyler? Fire them, Elliot said simply. Strip them of access. Blacklist them from working in this industry. Make sure they understand how close they came to something unforgivable. But let them live, Marcus. Let them walk away scared and jobless but breathing. And Braun? Elliot's expression hardened. Braun put his hands on my daughter. He's different. But even he doesn't die not for this. He goes somewhere quiet, somewhere he can think about his choices, and he stays there until I decide he's suffered enough. Clear? Marcus nodded slowly. You're serious about this? About walking away? Rachel asked me to choose, Elliot said quietly. Between her and the power. That's not even a choice, Marcus. It never was. I just forgot that somewhere along the way. It'll take time, Marcus warned. You can't just flip a switch and disappear. There are contracts, territories, people who depend on. I know, Elliot said. Which is why you're going to help me do this right. Transition leadership gradually. Pay out obligations. Dissolve partnerships cleanly. I want to leave this world without burning it down, Because Rachel's right scorched earth isn't strength. It's just destruction wearing a crown. Marcus sat back down, pulling out his phone. This is going to be complicated. Everything worth doing is. Elliot allowed himself a small smile. But for the first time in 7 years, Marcus, I actually feel like I'm making the right choice. Not the powerful choice. Not the safe choice, the right one. Isabel would be proud, Marcus said quietly. Elliot's throat tightened. I hope so. God, I hope so. They worked through the night, sketching out plans, identifying vulnerabilities, determining who could be trusted with the truth and who needed to be managed carefully. By dawn, they had the skeleton of a strategy 18 months to full dissolution, with careful steps to prevent power vacuums and violence. When Elliot finally drove back to the safe house, the sun was rising over the city he'd ruled for nearly a decade. Rachel was asleep on the couch, Thomas standing guard by the door. Elliot knelt beside her, brushing hair from her face. She stirred, eyes opening. Dad? I'm here, sweetheart. What did you do? The right thing, Elliot whispered. I chose you. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Really? Really? Elliot kissed her forehead. I'm coming home, Rachel. The real me. It's going to take time, but I'm coming home. She wrapped her arms around his neck, holding tight. And Elliot Renard feared crime boss. Ruthless empire builder held his daughter and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The dismantling of Elliot Renard's empire began with paperwork. Not violence, not threats, just signatures on documents that transferred ownership, dissolved partnerships, and severed ties that had taken years to forge. Rachel sat in her father's home office, watching him work through stacks of contracts with Marcus Trent at his side. It had been 5 days since the attack at Joe's diner, and the bruises on her throat had faded from purple to yellow-green, visible reminders of how close she'd come. This one transfers the waterfront properties to the Castellano family, Marcus was saying, sliding a document across the desk. They've been reliable partners. They'll maintain operations without disruption. Elliot signed without reading, trusting Marcus's judgment in ways he'd never trusted anyone except Isabel. What about the imports? Elliot asked. Selling to an overseas buyer. Clean transaction, no blowback. The crews get severance packages, generous ones. Nobody loses their livelihood. Rachel listened quietly, fascinated despite herself. She'd spent years avoiding knowledge of her father's business, treating it like a dark room she refused to enter. But watching him dismantle it, piece by careful piece, she saw something unexpected. He was good at this, strategic, thoughtful, ensuring minimal damage. If only he'd applied these skills to building instead of ruling. Derek and Tyler? Elliot asked, setting down his pen. Gone, Marcus confirmed. Derek's working construction in Nevada. Tyler moved back to his hometown in Ohio. Both understand that returning here would be unwise. And Braun? Marcus's expression darkened slightly. Still in the facility upstate, recovering from his injuries. He's been cooperative, gave us everything he knows about Derek's operation. What do you want done with him? Elliot glanced at Rachel. She met his eyes, understanding the silent question. Let him go, she said quietly. Both men turned to her. Rachel, Elliot started. I mean it, she interrupted. He's suffered. He lost everything. His reputation, his connections, probably his nerve for this kind of work. Keeping him locked up doesn't protect me. It just makes you the thing I asked you not to be. Elliot studied his daughter for a long moment, then nodded. Release him, with a warning that if he ever comes near my family again, there won't be mercy twice. Marcus made a note. Understood. They worked for another hour before Marcus left, carrying a briefcase full of documents to be filed, processed, executed. The machinery of dissolution grinding forward. When they were alone, Rachel moved to sit on the edge of her father's desk. How does it feel? She asked. Strange, Elliot admitted. I've spent so long building this, maintaining it, defending it. Letting it go feels like, I don't know, like stepping off a cliff and hoping there's ground below. There is, Rachel said softly. I'm the ground, Dad. I've always been here. Elliot's eyes misted. He stood, pulling her into an embrace. I know. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. They stood like that for a while. Father and daughter, in the office where so many brutal decisions had been made, now making the decision that mattered most. To choose love over power, to choose presence over control, to choose each other. The bell above Joe's roadside diner chimed as Elliot and Rachel walked through the door. It was late afternoon, the same time they'd met before, the same golden light cutting through windows that had witnessed violence and survived. The diner had reopened 3 days after the attack. New management, same red vinyl booths, same chipped Formica tables. The owner, a different person, now recognized Elliot immediately, his face going pale. "Mr. Renard, we'd like the back corner booth," Elliot said calmly, "if it's available." The owner nodded frantically, gesturing toward the empty restaurant. "Of course, anything you need." Elliot and Rachel walked to the booth where everything had changed. Rachel slid in first, her fingers trailing over the table's surface. Elliot sat across from her, the same position as before, but everything was different now. No guards outside, no security watching from cars, just Thomas, who'd driven them here and was now having coffee at the counter, giving them privacy because Elliot had asked, not ordered. The waitress appeared young, nervous. "Coffee?" "Please," Rachel said, smiling to put her at ease. "Two," Elliot added. They sat in comfortable silence while the coffee was poured, while the waitress retreated, while the diner resumed its ordinary rhythm around them. "Do you remember what I said?" Rachel asked finally. "That day, before everything happened, you said you loved me," Elliot replied. "And that you couldn't love what I'd become. Can you love what you're becoming now?" Rachel asked. Elliot considered the question seriously. In the past weeks, he'd signed away properties worth millions, dissolved partnerships that had taken years to build, walked away from power that most men would kill to possess. He'd also had dinner with Rachel 4 times, real dinner, with conversation and laughter and no phones interrupting. He'd attended her college art show, standing in the back like any proud father. He'd taught her to change a tire in his driveway, getting grease on his expensive pants and not caring. "I'm learning to," Elliot said honestly. "It's harder than I expected. Being ordinary, being present without being in control." "You're not ordinary," Rachel said. "You're just being a dad. That's all I ever wanted." Elliot reached across the table, taking her hand. "I know. And I'm sorry it took nearly losing you to understand that." Rachel squeezed his fingers. "We're here now. That's what matters." The door chimed again. A family entered, parents with 2 young children, looking for a place to eat. They glanced at Elliot, saw nothing threatening, and chose a booth near the window. Just another customer. Just another father. Elliot watched them settle in, the mother helping the youngest with a coloring sheet, the father ordering for everyone. Normal. Simple. The life he'd never thought he wanted, the life he was learning to build. "What happens now?" Rachel asked. Elliot turned back to her. "Now, we finish our coffee, maybe order some pie. Then I drive you back to campus, help you study for your exam like you asked. And after that? After that, we do it again tomorrow, and the day after. We build a life, Rachel. Not an empire, just a life. Together." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, the good kind. "I'd like that." They stayed in that booth for over an hour, talking about everything and nothing, her classes, his plans to maybe start a legitimate business, places they wanted to travel together. When they finally stood to leave, Elliot dropped cash on the table, including a generous tip. As they walked toward the exit, Rachel paused, looking back at the booth where Braun had attacked her, where her father had saved her, where everything had changed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For choosing me." Elliot wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close as they walked out into the fading sunlight. "Always," he promised. "From now on, always." The Mercedes pulled away from Joe's diner, carrying a father and daughter toward a future neither had imagined possible. Behind them, the diner stood quiet, its red vinyl booths waiting for the next story, the next crisis, the next moment when ordinary lives intersected with extraordinary choices. But for Elliot and Rachel Renard, the story had already been written, not in violence or power or fear, but in the simple, profound truth that love, real love, required the courage to let go of everything except what mattered most, each other. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.